And it was a great lesson, you know.
That's a great story and really does go to the point you're making about how like screaming and yelling maybe is not the best way to communicate with people
Yeah,
when mistakes have been made. I saw a quote that off your Instagram that I want to read to you, and it's about essentially making it through SAS selection. I thought it found it really interesting. You said the reason that autonomy was so freely given is because every swing dick in that regiment had proven themselves by passing the hardest course of any military organization in the world. One, I think that's an incredible quote. Two, once you pass, is that the feeling you kind of have like we did it? Like we got through the toughest thing that they could throw at us. We are kind of invincible. We are like we're the tip of the spear. I mean, how confident do you feel after getting through training like that?
yeah, it can, and that in itself can be a double-edged sword. For me, it was I had two sides of the sword really because it's an amazing feeling, but it's a bit like if you ever see if you ever watch like a documentary on a famous rock star or an actor, someone famous who comes into success really young and they have more money, more attention. There's some classic examples out there. Mike Tyson and Justin Bieber, they're a contrast in themselves, but people that are famous and rich very young. Now that I wasn't rich and famous, but the significance of that title and the that having that cat badge and knowing that you've done that, it comes with a lot of significance. You feel I'm actually I had to pinch myself. I always remember going back to Scotland the first time that I after I passed, and one of my friends was like, "You're in the SAS." Like he remembers watching Who Dares Wins with me when we were 10 years old. He's like, you've actually done this." He just I can't believe it, and I kind of it didn't really sink in for me. But then when it started to sink in, I thought, yeah, I am. I guess I am. But so it goes to your head, and it went to my head, and with that comes an ego, and it shouldn't, but it did because I was very young, still a bit immature to deal with all that, and I guess I didn't really harness it very well. So there was a bit of a conflict, and I guess that's why the average age is late 20s to 30. So I was 22, very young, and I had all this shit went to my head because people were telling me this is amazing what you've done, and you're young and you're the youngest guy to get in, apart from one other guy, but. Um, it all went to my head, and I guess it didn't really serve me. But going back to the quote on Instagram, I do believe it's definitely one of the hardest courses. I mean, I've not done all the other courses, so I couldn't. Let's face it, you would have to do them all, and then go right. Which one did I find the hardest? The fact of the matter is, some people find one thing harder than another. I've heard guys that have done the Mountain Leaders course say it was harder than SAS selection. It's a different type of hard. It's a physical thing. I guess everyone's different. They find different elements hard. I found the jungle hard, but I enjoyed it, so I didn't really find it as hard as maybe like the hills, like when you do aptitude on the first 4 weeks. I found that really physically challenging because it was carrying more weight. It was longer distances. The jungle was really interesting for me, and I really liked the jungle. So I didn't really relate to that as being hard. I just found it was challenging, of course, but I was so into it and I wanted to learn that it kind of took the attention off the difficulty. There were things like the beach run. So when you arrive in Brunei, one of the first things you do for acclimation training is you go out in the term is beach runs. So you go out in the beach runs, which are like several miles in the blistering heat, first thing in the morning, and most guys struggle. Most guys are an absolute shit state, and I breezed it. I fucking breezed it because I could run like the wind. I was like, you know, weigh like 130 pounds, and I could run like the wind. I wasn't very physically strong, but then that was my Achilles heel on selection. I was really small, and I remember we went out in this beach run one day, and there was one of the staff, a guy called Martin, and a big Irish guy, and he told us this story. So there was this story that he told us about a Scots guard from the Malaya campaign who was shot and trapped behind enemy lines, and he had to crawl something like 2 miles to get to safety, to get to home ground, and and he seal crawled because he was shot in the legs. and he dragged his carcass back. Upper body. It was all upper body, and he basically dragged his legs. So they call them seal crawls, and he did this for some fair distance. Siri's gone off again. I need to disable this, I think, for future calls. So we were on this beach run and we had been absolutely smashed for miles. And what the DS do, they'll like smash you on the run and then they'll stop and then they'll tell you to pick someone. They'll pick a partner, find a partner, pick each other up. Right, okay, put someone over your shoulder, run over to that fucking cliff face and back again, and they get their breaths back so they can rest and it's not as hard on them. And then the last thing they got us to do was seal crawls. And he says, right, everyone line up, get in your belt buckle. He said there was he went into this story about this guy called Scott, this Scots guard. And he said he crawled for 2 miles. He said, so you're now going to seal crawl from me to one of the other staff. And he was like, it seemed like he was miles away. And I thought, holy shit. And I always remember this. Everyone was like cheating. Everyone was, you're supposed to drag your dead weight legs. But I was looking around and people were like lifting their knees up and sort of like facilitating the move with their feet. But if you got caught, then that was a black mark. So I did it properly and I did it until I could hardly hold myself up. And my legs were all like, I'd cut all my knees and all the skin was off my thighs and my knees. And I thought, shit, we're going into the jungle, infection is going to be a risk and all that. So we got back to camp and we were at breakfast. And I always remember he said to me, he says, Bruce, says you can run like the wind. He says, but your upper body's weak. And I was like, oh, I need to prove him wrong. So when I got to the squadron, first thing I did was get in the gym, lifting weights, and I got strong and bigger because I wanted to sort of, take that risk factor away because I thought I don't want to be the weak link in the squadron. But yeah, it's all mind games.
That's beyond fascinating. You had mentioned earlier when you were talking about the movie that the guy had been fired. Are there any examples you can talk about that are like an automatic green light? If you do this, whether it be in training or whatever it might be, you're gone. Like if you do this one thing, no questions asked, you're out of here.
Yeah, I mean, and it has happened to people. I've seen it happen to people. There was one guy who was on my selection course who did something on another course. He lost a piece of equipment, and it was an instant dismissal because it was something that was, it was a really, frowned upon mess up if you lost sensitive equipment on site of on a close target recce or something. And there were other people who like violence. If someone had done something, broken the law, uh, and sometimes it's out of the regiment's hands. I mean, they will often back you up as much as they can because I guess it depends on the moral code.